Well, here we are, 18 weeks into the war, October 19th, and I finally find that somewhere buried into the commander's page, I can just quickly add pilots to every single unit. The things I'm still learning about this game. Very much enjoy laughing at myself, but that is the point of this campaign, is to learn this game. So, starting with the tour of the front lines. Rostov in particular, his units are aggressive. They have no reason not to be. Everything I have down there is relatively exhausted. So this week we see about 10 to a dozen battles, all successful on his end. His units in the center, fresh after mopping up the isolated divisions of mine, move to the river line. They cross at 2 different points successfully. They do not follow up on it though, so they still leave me my side of the river, at least for this week. And for the most part, the rest of the lines moving up to the north near Moscow are quiet. There's one small skirmish north of Tula. It works for him, but it doesn't really, there's not much damage to me. So the main battle this week was the city of Kerch, where I spent 10 action points to build a fortress earlier on in the war. I got 3 rifle divisions inside of it and 2 naval infantry brigades. I do not remember leaving them under Stavka, so that was definitely a mistake of mine. On top of that, the leader that I put in charge of the coastal army, which was his, well, I guess I didn't really put him in charge, but it was his duty to try to defend this, is utterly average. So I could have devoted more energy to defending this city. That I do understand. What I don't understand is how in the battle I only take 2,000 casualties and then immediately vacate the premises. I can see in this image 2 of the, for some reason, the naval brigades decided to flee. There's no like stand ground and fight. There's no this was worth 10 action points and turned into several weeks of combat. Let alone, I'm failing to see anything that'll duplicate the lengthy battle that was Stalingrad. And that's okay if that's the case, as I still have a game to learn here. Returning to the bird's eye image, after a week of progression, not much has changed. The Rostov area is obviously disappointing, but I'm not going to lose the war there. Everything else has remained relatively stagnant, and in the northwest he seems to be pulling back, probably digging in for winter, is my guess. But before we reach winter, I want to do something different with my Air Force. Thus far in the war, I've operated under either a complete rest approach or an extensive bombing campaign, using several air commands and losing 500 airplanes in the process. For this week, I want to take very specific approaches, and I only want to hit on one day. And the idea, and sometimes even just like literally one raid on that day. And the idea that I'm having is, if it's later on in the week, maybe I'll be able to float in kind of undetected. And if he does counteract it, it's not happening enough times to where he's able to take out like 100, 200 aircraft in the process. So I do this from the southern perspective, moving northwards, just to try to figure out where the line is with the heavy rain. This Western Command is the final attack, and it's mostly as a testing ground for me to gauge how much operational losses will be. Because I'm not gonna lie, I'm tempted to do stuff during the winter. I'm also hopeful with specific missions like this, it helps raise their experience a little bit since more would be surviving. So, 30 off the bat was a little worrisome, but in the end losing 60-something aircraft was kind of what I was going for. And digging into the numbers deeper, 30 operational losses, mostly coming in that attack run planned by the Western Air Command, is acceptable. I mean, there was 160 bombers that went in on that, so I can handle those losses. And flipping it around to what I was able to accomplish, 412 Axis casualties with 14 guns and a tank, with just 5 very specified bombing runs is definitely very satisfactory for me. It was exactly what I was going for. The real question will be whether or not I can get away with this when he's flying his fighters, because I'm no comparison in the air between his 109s and any of my fighter pilots. On the ground, though, the situation in Rostov remains pretty much as dire as I stated at the beginning of this. I'm just going to continue to fall back a bit, try to create a buffer zone, and see what I decide to do in the next several weeks of bringing some form of reinforcements here. Leningrad front, I take advantage of the free terrain he gives me. This is definitely going to be a morale boost for all Soviet citizens, even though they don't have to know that it was done completely for free. But I do get my city back and a couple new supply depots to hopefully bolster this area for whatever I've planned for this in the future. But besides just troop movement across the front, I do have 2 attacks. The 12th Army crosses a river and strikes the 160th Infantry Division with fairly even results. So they do hold their ground, but it doesn't really bother me. I follow that up with trying to push back in the Tula region. The 54th Army strikes at his 17th Panzer Division. I do get him to retreat. What I do have to do a better job at is paying attention to my army structure. I have to eliminate these negatives that I can control. But with my attacks on the ground, adding up to another 660 casualties, 25 guns, and 9 vehicles, and plus with what I did in the air earlier, I'm relatively content with what I was able to accomplish in that department. So looking at how the turn began, with the transition into where I sit at the end of it, it's no denying that this was a quiet turn, and I kind of expect the next couple weeks to remain the same in that department. The fall of Kerch being the disappointing side of it. But I am going to stick with this new doctrine for my air forces. I'm going to continue to pay attention to it to see if it's actually working, at least on the side of increasing the experience. But if I'm able to continue to chip away at like 1,000, 2,000 German forces per week, at least getting in towards the new year, maybe that'll help me on the flip side as we get into 1942. But being that I have yet to be there, only time will tell. But I'm going to hand it back off to my opponent and see what I'm able to do with what situations he forces me under as I get into turn 19.